day 35 of the daily dollar cost average for Bitcoin. And as you can see, it's really flat, the portfolio. Now, I have been adding other altcoins, so it's not purely just Bitcoin. I'm just doing it just for diversity, just give you a little bit of stability, so to speak. But the altcoins aren't really doing all that great, but Bitcoin's doing fairly well. It's up another 3%. So again, the you know the portfolio has basically been flat, and again, which is what I was trying to achieve, trying to mitigate any of the wild swings. So anyway, so we'll just get right into it. So I'm gonna buy some Bitcoin, and again, the same routine. Go to the DAI account, the stable coin, over to Bitcoin, buy $333. View the transaction. Okay, there you have it. So it's done, and yeah, we'll just go over to YouTube, just see what these people are saying here. Okay, so pay attention to Bitcoin right now. These Bitcoin metrics might predict giant move. We've been watching that. I'm trying to find something maybe a little bit different. Inflation fears pump Bitcoin prices above 56,000. This is coming from CNBC. So, if that's coming from CNBC, like, wow, that's really mainstream when they're talking about how, we're in an inflationary period and Bitcoin is pumping because of fears of inflation. So that's when you know that, this isn't just, on the lips of people who are intimately involved with Bitcoin. This is becoming mainstream. All-time high confirmed. Mike Novogratz makes a new Bitcoin prediction for 2021. Okay, then you got Michael Saylor. You know what he's going to say, so I don't even know if it's worth listening to him, because he's going to say it's going to go up for forever and yada yada. Will Bitcoin go down now? This is important for Bitcoin. See, I would be willing, like I said before, I'm looking for it to go down. So, but anyways, then we got, cryptos are us, the wall of money. There's not really anything, too interesting here, I find. Um, See, when you see like this lunatic stuff, I don't know if I want to watch that. But see now, yeah, is it smart for companies to pour money into Bitcoin? And again, this is on CNBC, so that's um. See, and this is a CNBC one too. That you got a football player. It's probably that guy that has to be paid in Bitcoin. He's probably loaded right now. See, this guy here, he's always talking about how it's going to crash. And hey, I hope that's the guy I hope that's right the most. But I just don't think he knows what he's talking about. But yeah, Litecoin. They're talking about Litecoin. That thing sucks. And again, this isn't financial advice, but me personally, I'd never buy that. That thing is like they say it's going to be like a zombie coin, and what that means is it's going to be a coin that's out there, but nobody uses it. It's just it'll technically exist, but see, in order for a coin to have any sort of worth, pragmatically, it has to have some sort of utility that people actually use, that's actually integrated into society, and that one's really not really doing anything. It doesn't serve a purpose. Like Chainlink serves a purpose. Um, you know, Ethereum serves a purpose, so on and so forth. Litecoin is just out there, and it doesn't really do anything. It was trying to be another Bitcoin. The guy even who developed it said that. He goes, yeah, he goes, I wouldn't buy it. He goes, just buy Bitcoin. So, but anyways, okay, so I'm just looking here. Yeah, billionaire investing into Bitcoin and crypto. They're talking about Soros. We already covered that. Yeah, this was interesting. Max Kaiser gave Alex Jones 10,000 Bitcoin on a laptop 10 years ago. Now worth 550 million today. So this is interesting. Okay, so Bitcoin, US government preparing an attack. So Bitcoin, US government preparing an attack. So okay, we'll watch this one cuz this is one of the things, and like I've said, I've been looking for it to go down. So it's a buying opportunity, but this could be the catalyst. Now, I'm not saying it's going to go down forever. But what I want to see is it to go down, load up, and obviously come back. Because like I said, the thing's resilient. It's proven itself. But can it withstand a US government attack? I don't know. So we'll watch this video. I've never heard this person before, Trader University. So we'll just listen to it and hear what this person has to say.
Working 5 to 9, you've got.
This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about whether the U.S. government is preparing an attack on Bitcoin. We're getting some very interesting tweets from some insiders in government, and so I wanted to address these. Now, you know that I've been talking about different hypotheses about Bitcoin. This one from about a week ago is the hypothesis that the U.S. government actually wants much higher Bitcoin prices as a way of fighting the Chinese central bank digital currency. But it's important to realize that governments are divided. There's lots of different factions that are fighting with each other. It's not a uniform institution. So on the one hand, we have Wall Street, which is really on board with Bitcoin now. This is one of the things that gives me a lot of confidence because I usually have found in my life that whatever's good for Wall Street is good for the U.S. government. There's a lot of money sloshing back and forth between these two groups, as well as people moving back and forth. And so if Wall Street loves something, especially at the beginning, especially if it hasn't blown up the economy like subprime mortgages, the government's not going to step in and do anything against it. We just had some inside news here from Morgan Stanley that they're about to provide a Bitcoin investment vehicle, an ETF, etc. And they're trying to get all their RIAs on board with selling Bitcoin. So these are bullish signs for Bitcoin. We have lots of billionaires like Musk and Michael Saylor both buying Bitcoin personally, at least in the case of Michael Saylor, and also buying it for their balance sheets. So it's easy to be bullish on Bitcoin when the billionaires like it and Wall Street likes it. I think these are very powerful constituencies, and that's going to be very hard to go against Bitcoin when so many wealthy people like it. That being said, we are in an acute fiscal situation where the federal debt, the total debt of the U.S. federal government, is hitting approximately, call it 26, 27 trillion dollars. And this has reached the point where it's much higher than U.S. GDP. And this is really a huge problem. It has been a problem since the whole banking system was bailed out in 2008 and 2009. And so we have this situation where the giant iceberg that's about to hit the boat is U.S. government debt. Bitcoin is clearly a lifeboat. And what is it a lifeboat from? Well, I'll give you a perfect example here. We have the markets pricing in future inflation on the 5-year note. So this is the market's expected inflation at the 5-year level. It's called the break-even inflation rate. It's calculated by looking at TIPS versus regular treasuries. Anyway, it's north of 2%, 2.39%. This was usually never allowed to run so hot. 2% was really the limit that was imposed. But we've had a lot of comments from Powell, Chairman Jerome Powell, over the past 12 months that they are going to let the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. central bank, they're going to let inflation run hot. And it's actually, the actual inflation rates are obviously much, much higher than this. This is all part of sort of the CPI fallacy. That being said, even if this one is correct, if this projection is correct, 2.39% inflation rate on the 5-year break even, and then the 5-year treasury, just the straight nominal treasury, is yielding less than 1%. So anyone can see that if you are making 0.81% on an investment, you usually have to pay taxes on the interest income, and then it's being depreciated by 2.39%. You're actually losing money in real terms. Your purchasing power is going down. Now, this is how the U.S. government is going to try to escape from this debt load. It's going to let inflation run hot, hotter than the returns that you can get. You can't get these returns safely anywhere else except for treasuries. The problem is when treasury rates are below the inflation rate, you lose money, you lose purchasing power, and the government is able to grow its way out of the situation. So that is the basic lifeboat. If you're in something like Bitcoin, you are immune from these effects. And this is one reason that the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. federal government is worried. They're worried about people getting out of, especially institutional investors, other central banks, getting out of the fixed income market, which doesn't yield anything anyway, and you're losing money in real terms, exiting these bonds and going into Bitcoin. So before we move on to the critique and my worries about a U.S. government attack, I would just ask you, if you're enjoying this video, to hit the subscribe and like button. So we talked a little bit about this a couple of days ago. Yellen coming out, talking about how extremely inefficient Bitcoin is. She's obviously a huge opponent of Bitcoin. I thought it was ironic that a day or so after she made this announcement about Bitcoin being inefficient, the whole Fed banking system went down, the whole Fed wire system went down, and no one was able to send any money for a few hours. Of course, you could send the money using Bitcoin. Just a little bit of an irony or karma in effect here. But what I'm talking about today is that this Yellen speech may have been a trial balloon to test investor sentiment, to test the market's reaction to what may be coming down the road. Now, I'm getting this information from Harold Malmgren, who is born in 1935. He's 85 years old now, but he's the consummate insider. He worked for JFK. He worked for Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford. He's a real Washington, D.C. insider. And as such, it makes a lot of sense to follow his Twitter feed. And as he says many times, he only tweets about those things that he knows about. But still has a lot of friends in very high places. And so someone asked him a day or so ago, is Yellen's criticism of Bitcoin a trial balloon warning? And Malmgren confirms that it is, that there is new tax policy possibly being discussed. And he basically says a little bird alerted to him that Yellen is going after Bitcoin, or is planning to go after Bitcoin. She is as Gary Haubold here talks about in his tweet reply, Yellen would be the right cabinet member to do it. She's the former Fed chair. She's been in government for a very long time. And then Harold Malmgren responds by talking about how she's been thinking about central bank digital currencies for many years. And this is something she's very interested in helping to develop. And she likely just sees it as a question of timing. Now, the problem with this is that this could mean that some government action is coming through the U.S. Treasury and through Janet Yellen. And Harold Malmgren, who's a very high up source, as we said, this is what several little birds have been telling me. So we have this faction within the U.S. government, obviously, that wants to do something about Bitcoin. And the real question is, what can they do? Malmgren says, expect the IRS to establish a task force to tax all profits from crypto trading. Well, it's already sort of has to happen. You should be paying taxes on this in the U.S., especially if you're trading on centralized finance exchanges like Coinbase, all the activities being reported to the IRS. but this is talking about that there would be severe penalties for ignoring any requests for access to holdings. So theoretically, what could happen is the IRS could say, we want your private key, we want you to disclose completely how much Bitcoin you own. And currently, there's, I believe in this year's tax return, there is a box that you'll need to check if you traded or invested or hold any cryptocurrencies, including Bitcoin, in 2020. So this is definitely happening. And then Malmgren says he expects all the local and state tax authorities to jump in too and try to either tax it to death or really keep track of how much Bitcoin people are owning. The other sort of attacks that can happen is that the U.S. Treasury could impose capital controls on Bitcoin, or try to impose capital controls on Bitcoin. They could. It seems unlikely at this point that they'd shut down things like Coinbase and Gemini, the crypto exchanges, but they could regulate them much more strongly. They could try to control the on-ramps and off-ramps. For example, maybe they could require Coinbase saying you could only buy $100 worth of Bitcoin every month. You could have these sort of limits on the amount that you could purchase. They could also, as I talked about in previous video, they could impose an unrealized capital gains tax. So normally in the US, you only pay taxes on assets like stocks, for example, when you sell them. As long as you hold them, you don't have to pay any taxes. But once you sell them, you pay, you create a realized capital gain, and then you pay taxes on that. An unrealized capital gains tax would be where your position gets marked to market. So if you bought one Bitcoin at 10,000 and it's now 50,000, your unrealized capital gain is $40,000, and you might have to pay taxes on that every year, even though you haven't sold it. So there'd be sort of a mark to market thing going on, as happens with futures. Now, I think doing something like this would be extremely stupid, and I think it could actually trigger a financial crisis. At this point, Bitcoin is big enough that, and there's some very strong players involved in it, obviously, but it's big enough that it could kick off a financial crisis if any of these strict regulations are imposed on Bitcoin in the US. If, for example, you can't move your Bitcoin, if the off-ramps, the easy on and off-ramps have been closed or strictly curtailed, and you maybe you don't want to pay taxes on it, or you don't want to pay unrealized taxes, or maybe you have to pay taxes on your Bitcoin.
Okay, so what again, what this sounds to me is like, again, typical government, intervention, like, that runs amok and it turns into a complete catastrophe. And again, like it's like people like this, Janet Yellen and so on and so forth. Instead of pointing the finger at themselves and say we're in a financial problem because we caused it, we started printing fake money, so on and so forth. They were behind the whole thing. So they got to point their finger at Bitcoin. Do you think Bitcoin would ever have come about if these people in the Federal Reserve were doing what they were supposed to be doing? And you wouldn't have needed it. The reason why something comes out is because of utility. Like there's a reason for it. And the reason for Bitcoin was because of government stupidity, Federal Reserve stupidity. That's the whole reason why it came out. Inefficiency, stupidity, and, all around criminal activity. They would fund, certain things. And again, it was like a cartel. They'd make this fake money. They'd give it to people that they thought were, virtuous, but were up to something, right? So that's why this came about. So now they're going to try to destroy it. This is very similar to, again, if you're too young to remember, or you weren't even born or whatever, they had back in I think it was the 70s or 80s, it was called the savings and loan crisis. And again, what that was there was government intervention. Like the United States didn't really they had big, don't get me wrong, they had big banks, but they didn't have these giant banks like they do today, like Citigroup and like Citibank, Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase. They didn't have those giant banks back then. They had a lot of like regional banks. And what happened was interest rates got freakishly high. They were like 17, 18%, and I think as high as 21%. But what happened was Washington passed a law that you weren't allowed, like, because the way it works is, like, say for instance you get a mortgage and it's 21%. Well, your interest at a bank, like say you had a savings account, like the bank's going to make a spread. So if it's like mortgages went up to like 21%, so the bank might have been charging like 18, so they make that 3% spread, right? Well, they passed a law that you weren't allowed to give interest rates over, I think it was 10%, right? So people were missing out on that 8% interest rate. So what people did was they took all their money out of the bank. So all these little banks couldn't, they didn't have any more money. They simply had no money in the bank because everybody took it out to put it to buy something else. I think that they were buying treasury bills because they passed a law. Banks aren't allowed to pay a certain, I think it was 10%. Don't quote me on that, but it was something like there was an exact amount. They said, you're not allowed to pay interest higher than this. So they screwed with capitalism. And so there was a run on the banks. Everybody took their money out of the bank and they went to probably just U.S. treasuries, right? So there's the liquidity crisis. All these banks went out of business, but that's when all these like JP Morgan Chase, that's when those banks became giant because they bought all these little banks for next to nothing. And that's how they made these huge banks. Now, was that the end game in mind that they did this? I don't know. That I'm not even going to speculate on, but that's pragmatically what happened. Now, again, it looks like they're trying to do the same thing. Bitcoin is making money hand over fist. They don't like it because what they're doing completely sucks. Nobody's going to give you money to buy a treasury when you factor in inflation. I'm losing money. Nobody's going to do that. So again, instead of asking the reason why is our economy so screwed up? Maybe it's because we're printing fake money. We're not creating real jobs. The Democrats are giving China all these trade advantages that the States doesn't have, so it's killing jobs here. Instead of thinking things like that, no, we're just going to go kill Bitcoin. But like this person who's given this speech is saying, like that's stupidity. It'll be very similar to that savings and loans things. If you try to come in, they're going to come in with their typical, government scam, like, oh, you're only allowed to put in $100 a month. You're only allowed to do this. We're going to be watching you soon. Like they're going to make all these like government jobs to watch people buying and selling Bitcoin. Again, it just exemplifies government stupidity. Instead of trying to find the real root of the problem, they would hire, how many people they would hire to run this agency? Probably about 50,000 people. And again, they're going to give their friends the sweet jobs. So they're going to make their buddies and cousins and whatever, the president of this and the vice chair of that. And they're going to have this totally ridiculous watchdog sort of thing because they were running an inefficient, the Federal Reserve was being run completely idiotically. Congress is run by a bunch of idiots like AOC who thinks, what's that guy's name? What was she saying? Milton Keynes or something like that. She said, that's my favorite economist, Milton Keynes. She got Milton Friedman and John Maynard Keynes mixed up. And this person doesn't even exist. And she says, that's my favorite economist. What an idiot. Like you have these third-rate idiots running things. And then they come after this. Oh, this is the problem. No, I think you're the problem. You're the one that caused this, but they'll try. But if what I'm kind of hoping for, and again, this isn't financial advice, but kind of what I'm hoping for is if they start doing this and Bitcoin goes down, I'll buy more and then they back off because I honestly think they can't do this. Well, they can, but I mean, I don't think they could do it properly because how are you going to watch everybody? Because then you're going to get the issue of, okay, like if they go after Coinbase, guys won't buy it on Coinbase anymore. You'll probably kill Coinbase. Like something like that. Like certain players will probably go down, but I'm saying Bitcoin itself probably won't. Like the end result is they might destroy things like Kraken, Coinbase, all those sorts of things might get destroyed in the process. And they don't care. The government doesn't care. Like they'd be like, yeah, oh, well, that's, can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. They really don't care. Like, so somebody built up Coinbase. They made this, amazing company, so on and so forth, gets destroyed. Oh, well, That's the price we got to pay, because they're not, again, governments don't pay, they're never accountable for anything, right? So what people would do was they would start opening like offshore accounts, like really, underground, that nobody can get into it. And if the government starts moving in on those exchanges, they'll shut it down, open another one. Like, I think it's at the point now, technology, especially, you got to remember too, a lot of people who are writing all this code and stuff for Bitcoin, these are like way smarter people than people in the government. You know what I mean? I think there's always been smart people out there that are kind of renegades, but now you have like a reason for all these like, renegade type guys to work together, like and like I said, you're going to have guys that are like those guys, those MIT genius guys that didn't quite fit into the corporate culture, but they're friggin' smart. They're out in basements and stuff watching this, and they can come up with some pretty clever stuff. And like I said, they could move things into a jurisdiction. You watch, they'll have like a chain jurisdiction or something. Like, soon as something, government starts moving on, it'll move somewhere else. And then as soon as they move on there, bang, it'll move somewhere else. It'll probably constantly be moving, like where all this Bitcoin's being held. They'll do something like that. Like, these guys are smart. And I think like and again, the government's going to be blowing all this money, blowing all these resources, chasing something that I don't think they can win. Like they're good at coming into a city with machine guns and shooting people. They can do that. They've done that. They do it all the time. But when you're talking about cyberspace, like some of these guys are pretty smart, man. And like I said, they'll definitely have their work cut out for them if they do that. But like I said, just the fear of itself of this happening will probably bring down the price of Bitcoin, which I'm cool with. Like, if they want to do it, go ahead. If Bitcoin goes down to 10 grand, I'll start loading up, But anyways, that's it for today. I know it sounds kind of pessimistic, but I'm just saying this is what we're dealing with, right? Your main competitor right now is the government. They don't like the fact that anybody contests their power. And there's nothing more that upsets a government than somebody contesting their financial power, because that's where the real power lay. Anyway, so that's it for today, and I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.